When the waiter asked for my atour anniversary dinner, my husband replied, "She's not eating." She didn't pay a cent toward the bill. Can you imagine your husband on your 10th anniversary looking you dead in the eye and telling you that you're not allowed to eat? Because that's exactly what Paul did, loudly in public, right there in front of a horrified restaurant. "I'll have water," I said to the waiter, my voice barely a whisper. Paul, my husband, was already handing the menu back, a smug smile on his face. This was our 10th anniversary at the fancy steakhouse he'd picked, the one he'd made reservations for. What he hadn't told me were the conditions. The waiter, a young guy, just stood there, looking completely confused. "Ma'am, would you like to see the menu?" he asked, trying to be polite. But Paul cut him off, quick as a knife. "She's fine. I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, with a loaded potato." He was ordering a $100 meal while forbidding me from having even a breadstick. The waiter's brow furrowed. "Sir, is the lady not dining?" he asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Paul just laughed, a cold, hard sound that made my stomach churn. He said it loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, for the elderly couple at the next table to gasp. "She didn't bring any money, so she doesn't get to order. That's how restaurants work, right? You pay, you eat." My face burned. "Paul, please. It's our anniversary." He just rolled his eyes, then pulled out his phone, flashing his bank account at the poor waiter. "Look, hers has $14. Mine has $12,000. See? She wants to be independent, so she can independently pay for her own meals." He'd separated our finances 6 months ago, out of the blue, just declared it one day. The waiter shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I could bring some bread for the table," he offered, desperate. Paul shook his head. "Bread is for customers. She's just sitting here." Then he turned to me, his smile dropping. "You should have thought about dinner before you quit your job." My blood ran cold. I hadn't quit. I'd been laid off. But for weeks, he'd been telling everyone I'd chosen unemployment. "I was laid off, Paul," I choked out. "The company downsized." He waved his hand, dismissing me like a fly. "Successful people don't get laid off. You just weren't valuable enough to keep." The couple next to us was openly staring now. The woman looked absolutely horrified. Paul noticed, and instead of being ashamed, he just spoke louder. "I'm teaching her about consequences. No contribution means no consumption." He pulled out a wad of cash and fanned it on the table. "See this? This is what work looks like." The waiter tried again, bless his heart. "Perhaps a small salad?" Paul snatched the money back. "Did you not understand? No money, no food. It's simple economics." He glared at me. "Maybe being hungry will motivate you to find work faster." 40 jobs. I'd applied to 40 jobs that week. "You told me not to take the retail position," I whispered, "because it was beneath us." Paul let out a harsh, barking laugh. "That was before I realized you're professionally worthless now. Any job would be an improvement." That's when the older woman from the next table stood up. Her eyes were blazing. "Excuse me, miss," she said, looking straight at me. "Would you like to join us? We have an extra seat." Paul shot up, his face turning crimson. "She's my wife. She sits with me." The woman looked at him with pure disgust. "You're starving your wife in public." Paul pulled out his phone again. "I'm teaching financial responsibility." He showed her something on the screen. "This is her spending from last month. $60 on groceries." The woman blinked, confused. "She bought food for your home." Paul nodded, as if she'd just proved his point. "With my money. Then she has the audacity to say she's broke." He turned back to me, his voice a sneer. "You spent my grocery money, so now you can watch me eat." The waiter disappeared, probably to get the manager. Paul didn't even notice. He was too busy pulling up more bank records. "Look, January, she spent $30 on gas. February, $40 on medication." He was showing everyone my personal finances, all my money. But now, suddenly, she needs dinner. The medication was for anxiety, which had spiraled out of control since Paul had changed. That was when we shared accounts. Paul! I practically yelled. You said household expenses were both our responsibility. He just leaned back, dismissing me again. That was before you became a financial burden. The manager arrived, and Paul immediately launched into a complaint. Your waiter keeps trying to force food on my wife when I clearly stated she's not ordering. The manager looked between us, his expression unreadable. Sir, is there a problem? Paul put on his fake business smile. No problem at all. I'm a paying customer, ordering a meal. She's just accompanying me. The manager hesitated. We can't serve one person while the other sits hungry. Paul, ever the opportunist, pulled out more cash. I'll pay for her seat. A rental fee. How's $50? He slapped the bill on the table. There. Now she's paid to sit, but not eat. The older woman from the next table spoke up again, her voice clear and strong. This is financial abuse. Paul rounded on her. Abuse? I'm the one who pays for everything. House, mortgage, utilities, insurance, all me. He started counting on his fingers, like I was too stupid to understand. She contributes nothing, but expects to eat at expensive restaurants. Her husband stood up, a quiet, towering figure. Young man, he said, his voice low, you are humiliating your wife. Paul scoffed. She humiliated herself by being unemployable. That's when things truly shifted. The waiter came back with the manager and a security guard. Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave. Paul's face went from red to a terrifying purple. What? I'm the paying customer. The manager nodded firmly. And we reserve the right to refuse service. You're disturbing other guests. Paul stood up, absolutely outraged. This is discrimination against successful people. The security guard took a step closer. Sir, please leave voluntarily. Paul snatched his cash, stuffing it into his pocket. Fine, but she's walking home. Gas costs money. He stormed out, leaving me there completely exposed. The older woman, her name was Natasha, pulled out the chair next to her husband, Matt. She gestured for me to sit, and I moved like my body belonged to someone else. The waiter appeared, opening a menu in front of me, but I couldn't make sense of the words through the tears that blurred my vision. Natasha put her hand on my arm, warm and steady. Matt introduced them both, and I managed to say my name, but my voice cracked halfway through. Natasha, without asking what I wanted, ordered a chicken dish for me. I was so grateful. I couldn't have chosen a thing. The waiter brought bread, and I took a piece just to have something to do with my trembling hands. Matt asked if I needed them to call someone, and I shook my head. There was no one. My parents lived 3 states away, and Paul had slowly, deliberately cut me off from almost all my friends over the years. The food arrived, and Natasha watched me take the first bite before she started eating. The chicken was good, but it stuck in my throat, every swallow a painful reminder of Paul driving home alone, and what he'd do when I got there. Natasha asked where I was staying tonight. The question made my stomach hurt worse than the hunger had. I told her I lived with Paul, about 20 minutes away. She looked at Matt, and a silent conversation passed between them. Matt asked if I felt safe going home. I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. Natasha reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. She explained she volunteered at a shelter that helped women in difficult situations. The card was plain white, with an address and phone number. I slipped it into my pocket, knowing I wouldn't use it. Matt wrote his cell number on a napkin and slid it across the table. Call any time, day or night, he said, if you need help. I thanked them numbly and finished my chicken while they paid the bill over my protests. Natasha hugged me before I left, whispering, what happened tonight wasn't normal or okay. I walked to my car, knowing she was right, but absolutely lost on what to do. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Paul's car wasn't there. He'd gone somewhere else after leaving the restaurant. I unlocked the front door and flipped on every single light downstairs. The silence felt heavy, suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath. I went to the bedroom and pulled our marriage certificate from the filing cabinet. Then my birth certificate and social security card, tucked away in the back of my underwear drawer where Paul never looked. I searched his office for bank statements, but everything was password protected on his computer. The desk drawers held nothing useful, just old tax returns that showed how much money we'd made together before he separated everything. I even found $40 in his coat pocket, but put it back, terrified he'd notice it missing. I checked under the mattress in bathroom cabinets behind books on shelves. 2 hours passed, and I had a small, pathetic pile of documents on the kitchen table, but no cash and absolutely no plan. Paul's car pulled into the garage at 12:30 a.m. He walked in like he'd just been at a perfectly normal business dinner. He loosened his tie and asked what I'd made for dinner. I just stared at him from the kitchen table, surrounded by my meager collection of papers. He glanced at the documents, shrugged, and then said we should forget about the misunderstanding at the restaurant. I asked him what misunderstanding he meant. He waved his hand, brushing away my question like an annoying fly, and said I'd made a scene in front of strangers. I stood up so fast my chair crashed backward. "You're the one who made a scene," I yelled, my voice shaking, "by refusing to let me eat." He just laughed that hollow, cruel sound and said I was being dramatic again. He walked to the fridge, pulled out leftover pizza, and ate it cold while leaning against the counter. He said I'd embarrassed him in front of important people. I asked who, and he said the manager might have been someone he did business with. He finished the pizza and went upstairs without a word, without saying goodnight. I sat at that kitchen table until 3 a.m., staring at Natasha's business card. The next morning, I waited until Paul left for work. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold my phone. I dialed the number on Natasha's card. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm, like she'd been expecting my call. I asked if the offer to meet was still good, and she said, "Absolutely." She gave me the shelter's address and said she could be there at 2 that afternoon. I wrote down the directions, even though I'd already looked them up online 3 times. She asked if I was safe right now, and I said yes because Paul was at work. She told me to bring any important documents I had. I looked at the pile still sitting on the kitchen table, gathered everything, and stuffed it into a grocery bag. Then I spent 4 hours cleaning the house because I didn't know what else to do with myself. The shelter was in a converted office building downtown. I parked 2 blocks away, paranoid someone would see my car. Natasha met me at the front door and led me to a small room with a couch and chairs. A woman named Chloe introduced herself as one of the counselors. She had kind eyes and a notebook she didn't write in. She asked me to tell her what brought me there, and I started with the restaurant. But as I talked, it all came pouring out. How Paul had been controlling money for years, how he'd always handled the finances because he was better with numbers, how he'd made me ask permission to buy things even when I was working, questioning every purchase, making me return things he deemed unnecessary. When we had joint accounts, he'd monitor every transaction, calling me at work if I spent money without telling him. Separating the accounts 6 months ago hadn't been the start of the problem. It was just the latest step in something that had been happening since we got married. Chloe explained this was financial abuse. I just started crying because I'd never had words for it before. Chloe handed me a folder full of information about legal help and housing assistance. She said the first step was getting my own bank account that Paul couldn't access. Natasha offered to drive me to a bank across town where Paul didn't have any accounts. We went that afternoon, and I opened a checking account with $20 Natasha gave me as a donation. The bank rep asked if I wanted checks or just a debit card. I chose just the card, not wanting anything with my name and address Paul might find. The card was bright blue with my name printed on it. I held it in my hand and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't much money, but it was mine. Paul couldn't see the balance or question how I spent it. Natasha drove me back to my car, hugging me tight, and made me promise to call her if anything got worse. I got home before Paul and hid the debit card in a tampon box under the bathroom sink. Paul came home at 6, went straight to the living room. I followed him and found him on the couch, remote in hand. I tried to log into Netflix on my phone, got an error message. "Paul," I asked, "is something wrong with the account?" He smiled without looking at me. "I changed all the passwords." I asked why. "Because you don't contribute to those bills either." He'd changed Netflix, Hulu, even the Wi-Fi password. He told me the new Wi-Fi password would cost $50 if I wanted it. I went upstairs and used my phone data to look up free Wi-Fi spots. The library had it, and so did a coffee shop 2 miles away. I could live without Netflix, but I needed internet to apply for jobs. Paul called up the stairs, asking what I was making for dinner. I didn't answer. 3 days later, Paul announced he had a business trip. He'd be gone for 4 days, and he said it like a parent sending a child to their room. He packed his suitcase and left at 6 in the morning without saying goodbye. I waited until his car disappeared down the street. Then I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every bank statement I could find in his office. Screenshots of old emails where we discussed joint finances. Dates when he'd separated our accounts and changed passwords. Receipts showing he'd spent $300 at a bar the same week he'd told me we couldn't afford groceries. I even photographed the hole he'd punched in the wall last month during an argument. I'd backed everything up to a cloud storage account he didn't know about. By the end of that first day, I had over 100 photos documenting his spending versus mine and his pattern of control. My phone rang on the 3rd day of Paul's trip. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in months. Laura, my former coworker from the job I'd been laid off from. She asked how I was doing, and I tried to say fine, but instead I started crying. Everything came out in a rush. The restaurant, the money, Paul's trip, the shelter. Laura listened without interrupting. When I finished, she just said, "I'm coming over." She arrived 20 minutes later with coffee and her laptop. "We are updating your resume right now," she declared. We spent 3 hours rewriting my work history, making it look professional. Laura said her new company was hiring, and she'd put in a word for me. She also knew 2 other places looking for administrative help. By the time she left, I had applications ready to submit to 3 different jobs, and my resume looked better than it ever had. Laura hugged me at the door and made me promise to keep her updated. I watched her drive away and felt something I hadn't felt in months. It might have been hope. Laura called the next morning with a list of companies looking for people. She'd sent my resume to her boss and 2 other places she knew about. One interview was scheduled for tomorrow at 2, another for Thursday morning. The 3rd company wanted a phone call this afternoon. I wrote everything down on a notepad I'd hidden under my mattress where Paul wouldn't find it. Laura asked if I needed a ride to any of the interviews. "Yes," I said, because I couldn't risk Paul seeing me dressed up getting into a car. She said she'd pick me up at the library both days, since I told Paul the first was spending time there anyway. I met Chloe at the shelter that afternoon to practice answering interview questions. She had a list of common ones, and we went through each response until I stopped shaking when I talked about my skills. The hardest question was explaining why I left my last job. Chloe told me to keep it simple, professional, no mention of Paul or the financial problems. Just say the company downsized, and I was part of a larger layoff. She made me repeat it 10 times until it sounded natural, not rehearsed. Then she took me to the donation closet where they kept professional clothes for women going to interviews. I found a black blazer that fit perfectly, a blue shirt that looked clean and pressed. Chloe added a pair of dress pants and some black flats that were only slightly scuffed. I tried everything on in the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror. I looked like someone who belonged in an office, someone who had her life together. The person staring back didn't match how I felt inside. But maybe that was okay. Maybe I could fake it until it became real. The phone interview went better than expected. The woman asked about my experience, and I talked about my last position without my voice breaking. She seemed impressed with my organizational skills and said they'd call back tomorrow if they wanted an in-person meeting. When I hung up, I realized my hands had stopped shaking halfway through the conversation. Laura texted me, "Good luck for tomorrow," and said she'd be at the library at 1:30 to pick me up. The first in-person interview was at a marketing firm 20 minutes from our house. Laura drove me there and waited in the parking lot in case it was short. The office had glass walls, modern furniture, and everyone looked busy and important. The manager who interviewed me was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, and she smiled when she shook my hand. She asked me the same questions Chloe and I had practiced, and I answered each one without stumbling. She showed me the desk where I'd be working if I got the job, introduced me to 2 other people. Everyone seemed normal and friendly. No one looked at me like I was broken or worthless. The manager said they were interviewing 3 candidates and would make a decision by Monday. The second interview on Thursday was at Laura's new company. She introduced me to her boss, who ran the administrative department. This interview felt easier because Laura had already told them about my work history and skills. Her boss asked situational questions about handling difficult tasks and managing multiple priorities. I talked about systems I'd created at my old job to track projects and deadlines. She nodded along, making notes. At the end, she said they needed someone who could start soon and asked about my availability. "I can start whenever you need me," I said. She shook my hand and said I'd hear from them by the end of the week. I walked out of Laura's building feeling something strange in my chest. It took me a minute to recognize it. Actual hope. Real hope, not the desperate kind I'd been clinging to. 2 solid interviews and 1 more phone call scheduled for tomorrow. 3 real chances at independence. Paul came home from his business trip on Friday night. I was in the kitchen making dinner when he walked through the door with his suitcase. He didn't say hello or ask how I'd been. He just dropped his bag by the stairs and went straight to his office. I heard him on the phone, talking about his trip, laughing with whoever was on the other end. When he finally came into the kitchen, he looked at the pasta I was making and asked if I'd used his money to buy the groceries. "Yes," I said, because we both knew I had no other option. He nodded, as if he'd proven some grand point, and sat down at the table. I put a plate in front of him, and he started eating without thanking me. I sat across from him with my own plate, and we ate in silence. He didn't ask about my week or mention the restaurant or apologize for anything. He just ate his food and scrolled through his phone like nothing had happened. Laura's boss called on Saturday morning while Paul was in the shower. She offered me the administrative position, $40,000 a year with benefits after 90 days. I said yes before she even finished explaining the details. She wanted me to start Monday, which gave me 2 days to figure out how to hide this from Paul. I thanked her 3 times and she laughed, saying she was excited to have me on the team. When I hung up, I sat on the bed, staring at my phone. I had a job, a real job with real money that would go into my secret account. Chloe's voice played in my head, warning me not to tell Paul. He'd find a way to ruin it, or force me to quit, or call my new boss and sabotage everything. I had to keep this secret until I had enough money saved to leave safely. Paul came out of the bathroom and asked why I looked weird. I said I was fine, and he shrugged, going back to his phone. The rest of the weekend passed in the usual silence. Paul watched television and worked on his laptop. I cleaned the house, made meals, and pretended everything was normal. But something had shifted inside me. I had a plan now. I had money coming in that he couldn't control. Every day at this job would be 1 day closer to freedom. Paul noticed a change in me almost immediately. I hadn't realized I was acting different, but apparently I was. He started watching me more carefully, asking questions about where I'd been and what I'd done during his trip. I stuck to the story about spending time at the library, and he seemed to accept it. But on Wednesday night, I was in the shower when I heard our bedroom door open and close. I rushed through washing my hair, and when I got out, Paul was sitting on the bed, holding my phone. My stomach dropped. He looked up at me and asked what I was hiding. "Nothing," I said, reaching for the phone, but he pulled it back. He'd gone through my messages, emails, call history. I watched him scroll and scroll, looking for something to prove I was lying. But there was nothing there. I'd been using Natasha's phone to text Laura and Chloe. All my job emails went to an account he didn't know about. My phone was clean. He finally tossed it on the bed and said I seemed different lately. Happier. He wanted to know why. I said I wasn't different, and he laughed, saying I was definitely hiding something. Then he left the room, and I sat on the bed, shaking. That had been too close. I needed to be more careful about acting normal around him. Monday morning, I woke up early and got dressed in the bathroom so Paul wouldn't see my work clothes. I put on the blazer and pants from the shelter donation closet, looking at myself in the mirror. Professional, capable, employed. I put everything in my purse and walked downstairs in regular clothes. Paul was already up, drinking coffee. He asked where I was going so early, and I said the library opened at 9, and I wanted to get there when it was quiet. He nodded and went back to his phone. I drove to the library, changed in their bathroom, then drove to Laura's company. My first day went smoothly. Her boss showed me my desk, the filing system, introduced me to everyone. I spent the morning learning their software, organizing old files. Laura brought me coffee at lunch and asked how it was going. Great, I said, and I meant it. By the end of the day, I'd set up direct deposit into my secret bank account. The money would hit in 2 weeks. Real money that Paul couldn't touch or control or use against me. I changed back into regular clothes in the library bathroom before going home. Paul was already there, making dinner, which was unusual. He asked about my day at the library, and I said it was fine. Quiet. I'd read some books and used their computers. He seemed satisfied with that answer. This became my routine. Wake up early, change at the library, work all day, change back before going home. Paul never questioned it. He seemed pleased that I was doing something productive with my time, even if it was just volunteering. 2 weeks passed without incident. I got my first paycheck deposited and watched my secret account grow. $400 after taxes. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could feel the chains loosening, just slightly. Then Paul found my pay stub. I'd been so careful about everything else, but I'd left it in my coat pocket after checking it during lunch. He was home early on a Thursday, and I heard him yelling before I even got through the door. He was standing in the living room, holding the paper, his face crimson. "What is this?" he demanded, shaking it at me. I tried to take it, but he held it over his head. He'd found out. I was working, making money, lying to him for 2 weeks. "I was going to tell you," I started, but he laughed harsh and mean. He read the pay stub out loud, my salary, the name of the company. Then he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling your boss right now," he snarled. "I'm going to tell them you're mentally unstable, that you shouldn't be employed, that you lied on your application, that you're stealing from the company." I watched him dial, and something inside me broke. Not in the sad way, but in the way that finally made me stand up straight and look him in the eye. "Put the phone down," I said, my voice steady. He looked surprised, but kept dialing. I said it again, louder this time. "I'm keeping this job. You can call whoever you want, but I am not quitting." His face went from red to purple, and he stepped toward me fast. His fist went past my head and punched the wall so hard it left a hole in the drywall. "You'll regret defying me," he roared, and stormed out of the house. I stood there, staring at the hole next to where my head had been. My whole body started shaking uncontrollably. That could have been my face. That should have been my face. He'd missed on purpose this time, but next time he might not. I packed my bags that night while Paul slept. I left before sunrise. Natasha answered her phone on the first ring, even though it was barely 6 in the morning. She gave me her address and told me to come straight over. Matt made coffee while I sat at their kitchen table, shaking and crying, trying to explain what happened with the pay stub. Natasha called Michelle Bright, the attorney, and got me an appointment for that same afternoon. Michelle's office was small but professional, and she listened to everything without interrupting. She explained what legal separation meant and how we could get a restraining order based on the hole Paul punched in the wall. I showed her the photos I'd taken, and she nodded. "We have a strong case," she said. The paperwork took 2 hours to fill out, and Michelle said she'd file it first thing Monday morning. Paul would be served at his office, which she said was important because it would create a public record. I stayed with Natasha and Matt for 3 weeks while the legal process moved forward. Paul sent hundreds of texts, alternating between apologies and threats. Michelle told me not to respond to any of them, to save everything as evidence. The restraining order came through, and Paul violated it twice by showing up at Natasha's house. The second time, Matt called police, and Paul spent a night in jail. Michelle discovered hidden accounts during the asset disclosure phase. Paul had been moving money into accounts under his mother's name for over a year. The judge was not happy about that, and it helped my case significantly. 3 months after I left, I signed a lease on a small apartment across town. It was just a studio, but it was mine, and Paul didn't know where it was. My job had given me a raise after my probation period ended, and I could afford the rent, plus groceries and utilities. I started seeing a therapist every Tuesday evening, and my new health insurance covered most of the cost. Paul's lawyer kept pushing for reconciliation meetings, but Michelle shut them down every time. 6 months after that anniversary dinner, I sat in Michelle's office, signing the final divorce papers. The settlement gave me half of everything, including the hidden accounts and Paul's retirement fund. Michelle had fought hard for every single dollar, and she won. I walked out of that office legally free and financially stable for the first time in years. Natasha threw me a small celebration dinner that night. Just her, Matt, and Laura. We ate good food and laughed, and I felt lighter than I had in forever. Some days were still hard when the anxiety hit, or when I saw couples at restaurants. But I had my own money and my own space, and people who actually cared whether I was okay. I was building something new, and it belonged completely to me. Have you ever had to fight for your independence like this? Or faced someone who tried to control your life? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to know.